Welcome to the fourth in a series of brief talks on resources that build from Scripture, apply Scripture, run with Scripture, but put in other words, put in the words of people who have thought deeply about God, about their lives, and have reflected wisely, and that wisdom has something to give to us today, and wisdom to give to the people that we minister to. And I want to look today at another bit of Martin Luther's wisdom. There's a marvelous little book, I believe it's still in print. It's called Luther's Prayers. And Luther had this wondrous sense of prayer as this dramatic, candid, honest, brief, to the point, grappling with God. He lived with the kind of edge of reality and candor in his prayer life that he was a living psalm in that sense. He was what you're meant to be. He's what I'm meant to be. And one of the things that Luther says, and he discusses from a couple of angles in this little book called Luther's Prayers, is he discusses the way that he uses Bible texts in his own personal devotional life. And he talks about whether it's one of the commandments of God, or the promises of God, or the things that God is calling us to, revelations of who God is, revelations of who we are. He talks about this coming at Scripture in 4 different senses, and that those 4 different senses help drive, animate, and guide his relationship with God. So, for example, the first one he'll talk about is that Scripture is a textbook. Scripture teaches us about God. It's a textbook about ourselves. It shows us what suffering is like. It shows us who our enemies are. It shows us what we're like. It shows us the meaning of our lives. It's this textbook that illumines the meaning of all things, and the meaning of the weather, the meaning of seasons, the meaning of being sick or being well. It's a revelation of the nature of reality. So there's that textbook function that teaches us. And then he says that Scripture, you can also then approach it as the textbook then becomes a hymn book. And so if we think about for example, a commandment, which might seem odd to view as a hymn, but Luther viewed the commandments of God as feeding songs, feeding joy. And so you think about the fact that we are called to have no unnourishing, rotten, pointless, useless words come out of our mouths, but only words that are constructive, that are appropriate to the moment and need at hand, that give grace to those who hear. That's a commandment. And Luther, the textbook teaches us it's a commandment, and then the hymn book teaches us, praise be to this God who never wastes his words, this God whose words are always constructive, this God whose words are always pointedly pertinent and relevant to the situation at hand, this God who every word out of his mouth gives grace to those who hear. Praise you, O Lord Most High. And then Luther's third use of Scripture, and you can see how this just teaches someone to, that thing we all have such huge difficulty doing, which is relating to God as if he's really a person, as if this is a real relationship. And so the textbook teaches us about him, and the hymn book returns to him the ways in which whatever passage we're looking at is a revelation of God himself, all praiseworthy. And the third thing he talks about that the text becomes a book of confession, because it shows us our shortcomings. And again, if we think about that Ephesians 4:29, that praise be to the God whose words always count and are always full of life. And God be merciful to me, that my words are so often unthinking, or I'm babbling, or I'm not bearing in mind the person I'm talking with and taking the time to really know and understand and take an interest in who are you and how's life going for you. But we're just talking, and forgive me, Lord. The Scripture becomes, the text becomes a hymn, becomes a prayer of confession. And then Luther closes by saying that this wonderful scripture, or this whatever snippet he's looking at, is then also a prayer book. It tells me what to ask for. Oh Lord, make my words count. Make my words this day. Let none of them be wasted. Don't let any fall to the ground. Don't let me say empty things, let alone hostile or destructive things. Let my words be appropriate to the needs of this person. Let every word out of my mouth give grace to those who hear. And you can see how that intercession then, you might say, is then this natural movement back out from talking to God, from listening to God, from listening and learning, praising and adoring, confessing, and then now asking for help. And then we go live. Martin Luther got that. And now just a word in Martin Luther's defense, or sometimes a caricature of Luther, as though he dissed the law of God. And it is far from it. There may be some in his train who did, but Luther himself wove his entire understanding of what it meant to be a Christian on this fourfold sense of a God who has a high calling for us, a God who himself is that calling, who's committed to, who then reveals how we fall short of that, and then who most graciously hears our prayers for both mercy and aid in our time of need.